Welcome back as we continue our Epic-sode with Alnoor Ladha. We are currently experiencing many themes like the intersectionality of systems, especially those that are no longer working during this current pandemic, as more and more people are discontent with business as usual. We pick up our conversation with Alnoor as he speaks on the correlation of this pandemic to our broken connection to nature.
So, as we say, this is the oxygen in which we breathe. It makes us understand that we have to rethink about how we breathe and what we are breathing and the manner by which we are breathing. And there's no coincidence that COVID is also making us rethink the manner by which we are breathing. And that is really the sort of pretext and the context for what is happening in the Amazon right now. And so you have Bolsonaro, who's of European descent, as most of the light-skinned people in Latin America who are also disproportionately the ruling class are. And there's been 500 plus years of historic and current systemic racism and violence against indigenous people. And now that's being manifested in this man who's, it's not even just one person, of course, it's a system, it's a structure. But Bolsonaro, some people call the tropical Trump, is the kind of ultimate embodiment of the psychosis of European culture that is out of place in the Latin American context. It's out of place in the Amazon. And Bolsonaro sees the Amazon as a resource to be raised and sold for short-term economic growth. And he has said so multiple times. And when you allow sort of mining and agribusiness and deforestation to happen at such rapid rates, they're giving out contracts to major companies who are concomitantly infecting indigenous peoples, uncontacted First Nations, etc., and spreading the disease. And this is not a side effect of what they're doing. There's a blatant agenda for genocide that is rooted in what all genocide is always rooted in, which is fear of the other, hate for yourself, a disconnection from the natural world and natural cycles. And in some ways, it is a sort of kamikaze suicide impulse, because when climate change comes for us, and it is coming, we're in it already, but I'm talking ecological destruction on a massive level, as a result of human-related activity. And there's 40 plus feedback loops in the last IPCC report, the last International Panel on Climate Change report, just one of which is the Siberian ice sheet, which will release 12 times the carbon that we've already released since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, in the form of methane, which is stronger, faster, etc. And so, we're talking 40% biodiversity loss on the planet by 2050, 10 to 20 meter sea level rise. Like, COVID is nothing. COVID is a blip in what's coming. And really, the only sort of lifeline humanity has to a potential future is our connection to the past. And indigenous peoples represent that direct line to our hunter-gatherer ancestors, to the Paleolithic, to that wise, intelligent part of human beings that remember what it is to be in symbiosis with the natural world. And so our only chance of surviving as a species is really in the protection and preservation and leadership of indigenous peoples around the world, and those who are self-sufficient and food sovereign, and those communities. And that's who we have to learn from right now. But the suicide impulse of growth at all costs capitalism, the death cult of modernity, is to destroy these cultures at all costs and make a profit in the process. And that's the agenda of Bolsonaro and Trump and Netanyahu in Israel and Putin in Russia and Modi in India and all the growth-based models around the world, which is the majority. It's probably the only political party. Martin Kirk, who was the co-founder of the Rules, often says there's only one political party on the planet, the OPP, one political party, and that's the neoliberal party. That's the growth at all costs party. And anyone who tries to resist that model will either be assassinated, thrown out of power, decide, et cetera, ridiculed. And so that's the milieu, that's the culture in which we're embedded.
Yes.
And so to answer the question, the Amazon, that's what's happening in the Amazon,
Yes,
you know,
that is exactly what's happening in the
COVID is just a
Amazon.
symptom of the cycle. Yeah.
Yes, Altosa Soltani, the founder of Amazon Watch, has said our choice is clear. We must change the way we live and relate to our living planet. Otherwise, the future of our species is not guaranteed. How can we help the Amazon right now?
Well, the scientists are now telling us that the Amazon is fast approaching its tipping point. And it might be 5 to 10 years away. And what that means is if you desertify a huge part or a significant part of the Amazon, that it reaches a tipping point where it can't regenerate faster than the destruction that's happening. And that will mean sort of runaway effects, that huge swaths of the Amazon will become savanna-like, arid, desert-like, dry, etc. And that would be catastrophic for the planet. That would be, you know, one of these feedback loops that in and of itself could wipe out human beings and, you know, quote unquote civilization as we know it. And you know, for example, the Amazon is not just the lungs of the earth in terms of airflow and carbon sequestration, etc. It also serves as a hydrological pump. It's the biotic pump of the earth, uh, generating and circulating 20+% of fresh water on the planet through rain cycles and hydrological cycles. And so no Amazon, no planet. You know, that it's you can't remove. It's like removing the most critical vital organs in your body and thinking you can be the same. And so what can we do? I think there it's at multiple levels, right? There, like I come from some more anarchist political philosophy and a mystical spiritual tradition in Sufism. So I'm not a big believer in telling people what they should do. But I do believe that part of our task right now, as humans incarnate, you know, on Gaia in 2020, is first of all to be aware of the consequences of our actions at an individual level. And people will say that doesn't matter, but it does matter to know the consequences of your action, like how much food and energy and resources it takes to prop up one Western life is astronomical.
Yes.
It's outrageous. You know, it's fundamentally unfair to the rest of life on this planet. So, you know, I would say that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is to be good students of our culture, to really understand the oxygen by which we breathe, to take the time to contemplate how capitalism works, what its effects are, what it's doing to you. And then the third I'd say is to deprogram yourself actively from modernity, from the dominant Western capitalist industrial extractive culture. And that deprogramming, you know, and you mentioned psychedelics before, that's one part of it, and a deep spiritual practice is another part of it, and there may be yoga and meditation and becoming a vegan, and, you know, there's so many aspects of that deprogramming. But, you know, what at the root of it is to really address the hungry ghost that lives within all of us, that takes more than it needs, and to really reactivate those parts are still of the Paleolithic, that understand what it is to live with village mindedness, in generosity, in altruism, in cooperation, in interdependence, and to really nurture and cultivate those aspects of ourselves. And then the fourth, I would say, is to organize at a community level, to not just be sort of passively against something, and this is similar to the debate on racial justice right now. Angela Davis always says it's not enough to be uh, uh, not a racist. You have to actively be anti-racist. So it's
Yeah.
not enough just to be against, or not just enough to just be like, I emotionally and spiritually and intellectually am against the destruction of the Amazon. You have to be, in some ways, our choice is growth or life. We can continue to grow the global economy the way we are and think we can just continue going on and going to university to get these shitty jobs, to work as, you know, spokes in a hub of an infinite growth-based project, or we can choose life, which will require that we are conscientious objectors to the capitalist system, that we are actively in resistance and organizing against the system that is destroying all life.
No.
And then maybe the fifth and last thing to say is not just at a community level, but to do this at a structural level, to do this at a global level, to withdraw power from nation states, from parastatal organizations and international institutions like the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, and all the other bankrupt organs of neoliberal destruction.
That is our reality. No, you're correct. That is our reality, and this system has been in place for hundreds of years, and it's no longer working for the majority of humanity, not even for our own survival, because every human life is treated like it's expendable. So, and that's actually, we're going to come full circle around and talk about human actions, right? You recently collaborated on a documentary called Action in the Anthropocene, speaking to the current reality of humanity's survival and the inequalities that have long existed and now being prominently on the front lines. Can you share your experience in making the film, and what are your next projects?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Yeah, so that documentary was part of the closing of the rules. So we had this sort of 8-year experiment in creating an activist collective and a think tank for economic and political alternatives that also worked directly with social movements around the world, largely in the global south, but peasant movements, farmer movements, indigenous movements, anti-capitalist movements, post-capitalist movements. And we were asked after 8 years of this work to do a documentary about the organization, about the Rules Collective. And we all just felt uncomfortable doing that because the point of doing this work is not attribution, it's not branding, it's not to live in perpetuity, which is why we, from its inception, decided we'd only live for a time-bound period. But it's to be in service to the evolution of Gaia as it's unfolding right now, which is also our evolution, right? Consciousness and evolution are not happening outside of us; they're happening through us and with us. And so we decided to interview some of them. I don't want to say leading minds because it's this strange hierarchical sort of idea, but just people who have been doing the work that we admire, both politically and spiritually. And so it's a series of interviews with people like Feroz Manji, an amazing Pan-Africanist, Kumi Naidu, who is the global executive director of Greenpeace and Amnesty International, Atossa Soltani, who you mentioned from Amazon Watch, Bayo Akomolafe, actors, and many others. LaDonna Brave Bull Allard from Standing Rock, Tiokasin Ghost Horse, Lakota Elder. So just a mix of people, and it's short. It's a 17-minute documentary. It's available on therules.org on the homepage. You can click on it, and yeah, it's really just a sort of a beginning of a dialogue, really, around the evolution of activism and post-activism and sacred activism, and how we are moving from the idea of resistance to resistance and renewal, to both remove the noose of capitalism from the neck of 99% of humanity and all of life, to simultaneously also building the living alternatives for what the post-capitalist world, or post-capitalist worlds in plural, could be and will be. And directed and put together and edited by Federico Cruz, who's a brilliant cultural activist and thinker and writer and maker, based out of Mexico, based out of Oaxaca, and who's part of the Rules Collective. So I really give credit to him.
Amazing. And what are you going to do next?
I'm taking a sabbatical year, after 8 years of intensity with the rules, and in the middle of that, trying to start an alternative community, and I guess all the entanglements that come with projects like that is to just go into the not knowing, and to do a year with no income, living in the gift with no savings, just trusting the universe, and really refining and honing and nourishing the ability to be in dialogue with the living planet, with the animate universe, and really just going to my altar and asking every day how I'd be in service to the mother and her unfolding, and seeing what omens present themselves, really.
Oh, I can really appreciate that. I think that's another reason why I kind of feel like there's this paradigm shift that's happening right now. And when we talk about mycelial and understanding that it's been here for billions of years, that it helped even create, what we know as Earth, right? At what do you call it, a molecular level. And it's just such a stark reminder. When I saw some of the programs when they talk about how the Homo sapien species evolved from taking mushrooms because it expanded the mind. It makes me think that this is what's happening now. That all of these things that we're connecting us back to the land, back to the planet, these movements that is calling for us to, stop, think, feel the planet, and know where you come from. I feel like that is what's really happening, is that this human inherent yearning to go back home. And in fact, I'm going to share a little story. I kind of feel a little bit embarrassed, but I watched this series called Primal Survivor. And the host is Hazen Odell. He is part Native American. And he goes and travels to all these indigenous tribes that live around the world. And let me tell you, it is a test of the human spirit. Because when you think about the indigenous, they live day to day, and they depend on their environment to sustain them daily. So when you live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, which is what we originally were, you live day to day, you are always present because you never know what is going to sneak up on you in the wild. We worry about car accidents and being murdered. And when you're an indigenous, you live in nature, you're worried about getting bit by a pit viper, or being eaten by a crocodile, or being stampeded by elephants, or eaten by a hippo. Those things are unreal for me. And I think that this is like another lesson that I feel like we need to be in nature, so that we are constantly present and understand how precious it is just being a human being, existing together with this planet. So I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you for expanding our minds and sharing your spirit with us today. Please check out the links in today's podcast for Alnoor's film, Action in the Anthropocene, and how you can support organizations like Amazon Watch and the Amazon Emergency Fund, Tierra Valiente. And thank you so much for being here today, Alnoor, and sharing your work in changing the world. In the words of the great Mahatma Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. Let's start today.
Thank you, Bennett. Lots of love. We'll talk soon.
As we close out, let's indulge in some contemplative prose and visit the Poetry Corner for some deep thought, inspiration, or just feels. Today's poem is brought to you by Benu Amun-Ra, called Land Ho. Land Ho, a poem by Benu Amun-Ra. Land ho! Oh, that familiar cry from a seafarer perched way up on high. You can't deny the excited proclamation, bound for salvation from months at sea, traveling the oceans towards destiny, full of precious cargo, ancestors sold into slavery, taken from our own precious motherland, uprooted and harvested like any other plant, blown like dust in the wind, like diatoms to the sea, from the coast of Africa to distant shores of the North and South Americas. No more connected like before, beaten down to our core, losing hope in this slave trade to rob our souls for the sound of chains. 40 acres of pain, 400 years of gain, building a country that was not ours, on stolen land from the indigenous, torn from our mother, torn apart as brother fought brother, persecuted like no other, stronger, bigger, faster, for the benefit of the slave master. The pain, the trauma, the loss, the crack of the whip from the overseer boss, all for the obsession of owning land, the possession of another man's property. Land ho, I say, land ho. Thank you again for spending time with me on the green path. I am grateful for your open heart and open mind to take the time to listen to my voice and those of others. I look forward to being your host again on another episode of the Green Path podcast. Be kind to yourself, stay safe and healthy, and may you be happy and live with ease in all the days ahead.